to day 2 of our HRM Summit, Middle East 2021. We are off to a great start today with all server issues that we faced yesterday fully resolved. There was very little we could do that was beyond our control, but we are very, very grateful for your patience and your support. 40 speakers from 19 countries have joined us for HRM Summit this year, all of them sharing HR practices with fresh perspectives to navigate through a new normal. It opens doors of opportunities to learn and grow, leaving you with valuable takeaways. Yesterday, our speakers talked about developing strategies that will increase employee engagement and decrease retention, as well as learn to keep up with the ongoing workforce trends. They also shared non-monetary rewards that can be easily replicated, some very interesting learning and development strategies that are tried and tested, interesting learning tools through gamification, and unmasking your hidden voice. Today, we have another interesting lineup of speakers and keynotes with panel sessions touching upon the rapid change in learning, HR strategies to keep you with the future of work, taking payroll to the next level by revamping user experience, popular HR trends amid COVID, a very interesting LinkedIn report on workplace learning, creating a culture of coaching, diversity and inclusion, and we will end the day with our global community leaders who are helping to strengthen the current and future leadership of HR professionals. The meeting platform that you are on is extremely interactive. We would encourage everybody to network with your peers, forge lasting connections, share knowledge. Feel free to set up one-on-one meetings with them. And before or after the sessions as well, you can go and get a deeper understanding of tech platforms by reaching out to our sponsors, Nasij, Tesseract, BSH, Best Places to Work, OfficeKit, Talbrum, Bright HCM, and learn more about mobility, global mobility through our sponsor, Global Payment Transitions, all the way from Switzerland. All are unique in their technology and service offerings. Feel free to reach out to them. Reach out to our tech support if you need any help at all during the entire day. So with all of that said, let's kickstart day 2 by welcoming our very distinguished keynote speaker, all the way from Johannesburg in Africa, Vish Sangani, Head of Director of Learning and Talent, Standard Bank Africa, one of the biggest banks in Africa. He's from the corporate and investment banking. So he will be talking about learning at intersection of rapid change. But before he does that, let me tell you a little about him. Vish has got global experience. He's an award-winning HR leader with 24 years of deep business and cultural experience across 4 continents, with a broad variety of industry-leading multinationals in telecoms, technology, consulting, banking, and luxury retail. Vish has also worked across Australia, Africa, and Middle East with Microsoft, Chalhoub Group, Standard Chartered Bank, MTN, and Deloitte. So without further ado, let me welcome Vish.
We'll take a break for a minute and come back.
We'll just take a 1-minute break before we get Vish on board. So just bear with me. We'll just give Vish a couple of seconds to join in. There you are. Hey, Vish, there you are. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Let me try to
How
get
are
my
you?
presentation up.
Sure. You could do a share screen and I'll give you a heads up. Perfect. Yes.
Cool.
You're good to go, Vish. Wonderful to have you join us.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks everyone for having me. Thanks to the RUSHCOM team for organizing this conference, and a warm greetings to all the delegates. Hope you had a good time, and hopefully you'll have a great time today as well.
Absolutely.
So today I want to talk to you about sort of my macro experiences of the last 25 years around where I really believe at this time of our careers, we're at a massive intersection where the world is changing really, really fast. And what can we do as learning professionals to actually address that? As Helen introduced me, I am, I've been worked in different continents, different countries across the world. This is a quick summary of where I've been. So hopefully many of you have been colleagues in either technology, consulting, telecommunications, or retail. So I guess I bring together a lot of my experience right now in sharing some of the messages with you. So the agenda for today that I've kept is 4 things. The first thing is around a really quick, entertaining segment around how the world has changed and the way I've seen things over the last many, many years. The second segment is around how our learning consumers have shifted. And I deliberately talk about them as learning consumers because I think we need to take a much more consumer or client-centric approach to the way we deliver our services. The third area is around how we need to require, I guess, the way we offer learning needs to change as well. And last but not the least, how do we, as leaders in HR and learning, need to adapt and change? So hope you enjoy the 4 segments. Off I go. So quickly to start off with the first segment, which is how the world has changed. If I quickly take you back many, many years before probably many of us were even born, what I've reflected is that often industries have macro shifts. And in those shifts, the leaders that occupy the positions often don't have the long-term vision of how that industry might shift. So while we occupy HR and learning functions within those organizations, our strategy is only as relevant as the organization's strategy is. Chances are our organization strategy succeeds, or it actually might fail, and the organizations we work for and support might actually become redundant. Some anecdotal evidence around this history has well been documented. If you think about the railroads when they were first invented in the early 1900s, the leadership team of the railroads could never imagine how they could be a competition against the automotive industry. And they just believed that the automotive was a toy and that the railroads would always persist as the primary mode of transport. If you go again to a very old, very loved topic of ours around cinema, Harry Warner, back in, again, the early 1900s, in the time where cinema was black and white and also without any sound. So you couldn't hear the actors talk. You couldn't hear songs. You could just hear the background score. And he always believed at his time that why would anyone want to listen to actors talk? They're just happy watching a video montage come onto screen, and that would be what cinema would be like. And obviously he was wrong. If we go to sooner, in the 70s, the CEO of Digital Equipment actually declared in media that he never saw the appetite for personal computers to become household devices. He always thought that computers were meant for very, very large organizations, and there was no need ever for a personal computer. How wrong was he? This is a really good example, again, for those of you who grew up taking photographs in these cameras. Kodak decided, if you look on the left-hand side with the ring over here, Kodak decides for us how many photographs we take, 24 or 36. If you had more money, you would buy the 36. Hell, I'm sure most of you today don't even get out of bed. if you're going to be allowed to only take 24 photographs. We probably take 24 photographs of our breakfast nowadays, leave alone a whole holiday. And then lastly, if any of you are feeling very anxious, tired, and have had long careers and are feeling a bit exhausted at the end of that long day, it's okay, because I feel that way too. We have gone through an enormous amount of change. If you think about my personal career, I started working in my father's office, typing quotations on a typewriter and dialing on the circular keypad, and all the way getting into sales and getting my first modem. And you remember that experience when that would beep, you'd go running to find a landline. How were those times? And for those of you dedicated to the learning profession, you cannot forget the overhead projector. We developed great skill of writing with that sticky pen on the transparencies and projecting that to our classrooms. And then finally, a laptop was the threshold, which when I was early in my career, only senior leaders would get a laptop. And look where we are today. I'm talking to you from my laptop into your laptop in your home. So hopefully this has been a quite insightful journey around the change that's happened around us. And on a bit of a humorous take, again, for those of you who grew up watching movies like Back to the Future, this was a movie that made a great impact on me because it really allowed us to dream into the future. And one of the most amazing things about that movie, I remember when that car's tires would fold up sideways and it would start flying. And how was that a fantasy only to be seen on the big screen? Yet again, we are at a stage in lives where you and I might sit into one of these vehicles, in fact, autonomous, and be driven or ridden or flown somewhere, which is just unbelievable. So the second segment is around how our learning consumers have shifted. And the reason I say consumers, as I mentioned earlier, is because I really believe that learning teams need to get very client-centric. Any business that is not client-centric will not survive. In the same way, any function, especially a corporate functions that provides a service to internal employees, if they're not cutting edge and if they're not client-centric, we will not survive. So I think it's a bit of a wake-up call over the last couple of years to all of us learning teams and HR teams that we need to shift the way we need to service our employees. Our employees, when they step out of the office, they're used to hyper-competitive global experiences, whether it's Netflix or booking a cab on Uber or ordering their food on Uber Eats and so on. They want similar cutting-edge experiences from us within the organization. So no longer do we have the luxury of time to, I guess, be non-competitive in the service provision that we provide. So let's start with a little story and how that's evolved, and let's see the journey on that. So once upon a time, all of us would remember, anyone over a certain age will remember that classrooms are always pretty much the same. I think teaching has evolved a little bit, especially during the pandemic, but pretty much school curriculum, you would agree, for the masses has not caught up. It's pretty much about a blanket approach around one particular lesson being taught to everyone equally at the same time. It doesn't acknowledge where the people are, what stage they are, what interests they have, what professions they have, what they want to do, and so on. And I think that has fundamentally shifted for us in the organization. We come a lot from the left side, which is the kind of the traditional hierarchical organization, and probably some of us are still in that context. And a lot of organizations are moving towards this extremely complex matrixed organization. And maybe some of you are in the middle. But having said that, we need to sit back and think about how do we serve an organization where people's roles are getting more and more complex and the way they work is changing very rapidly. If we think about learning as a pure subject, I think we've all smelled the roses and seen the flowers by now, that learning is really not just happening in a classroom. Learning is not just really something that we control as learning leaders and directors and HR heads. Learning happens all the time. Look at this beautiful slide. You can see on the top, it goes from what's L&D led versus what's self-directed at the bottom. And then it happens every day, every week, every month, every quarter. So learning is happening whether we exist or not. And that's quite interesting. So there's a course for reinventing ourselves. And you'll also see on this example that bulk of the learning is actually happening self-directed. All of you are learning in different forms and different modalities, whether your organization provides you any sort of learning provision or not. If we think about another important trend around our shifting consumer need, is that it needs to be very personalized and self-directed. Right. One profession needs very different, the guys in the IT or technology space need very different learning than the guys facing clients who are doing sales, and so on and so on. So that's really important to understand, using that old classroom analogy, that we cannot provide one service to all the organizations, and it needs to be extremely bespoke. Then the question arises, how do we make it very bespoke? We have to use technology in order to scale. If you look at another important trend as well, if I was in the audience, I would pause for a few seconds and ask someone to raise their hand and say, what do they say about goldfish in terms of their memory? Some people would say that goldfish memory lasts only a few seconds, but I think research has proven the memory of goldfish can last up to 5 months. Now that sounds a lot for a little fish, but in the human context, that also is the case. There's something called the exponential nature of forgetting, or we call it the forgetting curve, that as time passes, we remember less and less. If that's the case, and if we have said we've rolled out these great programs, and we have covered the entire management audience on a leadership program, what does that say to our delivery? That everything that we have taught at a point in time in a classroom or an online webinar is forgotten over time. And that's where the rise of things like micro-learning and all the different agile learning strategies have come into fore. Because it says that a typical forgetting curve shows that if knowledge is not repeated and reviewed on a kind of a frequent basis, you actually lose that forever. And that's why in sports, they always say you need to practice very often. You can't just show up at a cricket match and win the game. You need to practice every day leading on to the match. And the same goes for any skill that we want to develop. They also say if you don't use it, you lose it. So hopefully that's something that's really in our backdrop. The next thing I found as well in terms of the shifting consumer landscape of our employees is that employees don't always want to learn in a 2-day classroom event. The bulk of the learning, as you know, happens on the job. They almost say 70% of the learning happens on the job, 20% is through other experiences and engagements, and only 10% is through formal training programs that learning solutions or learning departments may provide. So that goes to beg to say, if that's the case and you only have 10% market share, which could diminish over time, how can you go into that 70% space to make sure you make it very relevant and give the employees the lens of learning on the job? So everything that we need to do, everything that we do in the future, the solutions we provide has to be learning in the flow of work. I mean, this picture over here could be a very social conversation between colleagues who bumped into each other, or this could actually be a very important team meeting about a strategic product development or about a client management team. We don't know that, but that's the magic. We need to make sure that we embed with leaders the mindset of learning in the flow of the work and how they enrich the conversations and the way employees think about their learning in the flow of work. You know, many years ago, I remember an employee came up to me and said, you know, Vish, I haven't been on a single program this year. You guys haven't put me on any learning. And I said, well, if 70 to 80% is on the job, what have you actually done? Yes, you may not have attended the learning program, but if you haven't seen your work as the greatest source of learning, if you haven't seen your interaction with your colleagues and learning the new mindsets, the way of thinking, the way of problem solving, being creative on a certain difficult challenge as a learning experience, you truly have not learned anything. If we think about, so I guess what we're trying to say here is that learning needs to be we need to sit at the backside and think if that's the nature of the employee landscape and learning is truly in the flow of work, we need to be able to provide services that they can access when they need at that particular point in time. And often in learning fraternity, we call this bite-sized learning. That if you want just to source a cherry, that's all you need. Don't give the guys strawberries and oranges. And that's really the thinking we need to have and the mindset we need to have in making sure that our platforms provide that. Another really important trend that I've seen as well that we're working on is the difference in the way we approach talent management. I think a lot of us have grown up in the 9-box grid that you might remember doing talent reviews, and we box people in and they stay in that box for many months and many years even. What that often I find is that is a little bit of a centralized approach. And I think like many things in the world, things are getting much more decentralized. And I believe now that the curious learners will win, not necessarily the ones that you label as talent, and the ones that are not labeled as talent do not actually win. And in many ways, I think going forward, any good talent strategy should be a little bit like a marathon, where you provide the infrastructure, you provide the guardrails, you provide the rules, the philosophies, and the frameworks, and ultimately, may the best man or woman win. And it really depends on the perseverance and the hard work that people put in place based on what you provide in order to move forward on their skilling agenda. If I show you now some anecdotal evidence of some of the work that we're doing, we have done a little bit of talent segmentation in our audience because we need that. People are at different stages in their careers. Some of them could be leaders, and some of them could be specialists. Some of them could be early in their career, and some of them could be in a more mature phase in their career. So you can't just offer, I guess, specialist talent training to future leaders because that might not apply to them. So we've taken very intense hard box, kind of 9-box segmenting and made it much more open, made it much more decentralized to say we understand the stages of your careers. And if you're a specialist and if you're in technology, your needs are very different because 70% of your time is spent in the technology landscape and maybe 20-30% is spent around leadership if you lead teams. And because of that, we provided different toolkits and different journeys for people to manage their own careers and move forward, just like the marathon example, and take themselves forward. You'll see as well over here a much more decentralized approach to the way we run some of our talent programs. We're very focused on providing toolboxes to people. Ultimately, as I said earlier, if you're curious and if the people are curious, they will pick things up and take them in their stride and develop their careers. If they're not, no matter what label you give them, no matter what succession label you give them, they will not rise to the occasion. Another thing as well we're working on, like probably many of you, is around future skilling. We're just finding that the pace of change is so important that we're finding more and more jobs are becoming redundant. We also find that, I guess in many ways, the new, let's say, progression curve is not the way it used to be. If you remember that organization chart, on the left was hierarchical organization and on the right was a networked organization. As you move more and more to the networked organization, you're not going to get progression the way it was, 10, 15 years ago. It's not always about the promotion to the next level, but it's about progression into new and different experiences that help you build good skills that will make you more relevant in the future. We're also finding that the shelf life, and I use the milk carton as an example because that probably has the shortest shelf life in your house, is changing. Again, the things that we have learned and our people have learned cannot be banked for the next 10, 20 years. That learning curve is getting quicker, the learning expiry is getting shorter, and new emerging skills are coming to the fore, which is where we need to play in terms of identifying and helping our leaders plan the strategy. We've seen this trend in a lot of multinationals already. People are not employing people just because they have a degree. That's falling off. If you can drive really effective change management, if you can manage product development in rapid cycles, if you can do coding or whatever it is, the micro skill and the ability to do something now in the present is far more important than what you did over the last 10 years. Show us you can do it, and you've got a job, is becoming the new mantra. We're also finding in that, as we spoke, is that the tenure of careers is shortening as well. So again, like the old days, people bank on a role to become a senior manager or a general manager, and off they go. Okay, I'm set for life. That's changing very rapidly. I have an example recently in banking, and all of you that are in banking right now will know that sustainable finance is becoming a very, very important skill. It falls under the broader ESG umbrella. And we have a situation right now that we are looking at some nominations for people to do a international qualification or a master's in sustainable finance. Now, it's interesting to see that some of the senior leaders immediately are asking, how long is the program? How much time will it take away from me? And so on. While some of the people in the stage in the career are just sucking it up. They're really keen to learn that. So that makes me think, what's the tenure of careers? Where will that senior leader be in 5 or 10 years versus the guy who wants to go ahead, learn that new skill, upskilling himself, making himself relevant in the new world of work, will probably be at a different trajectory because he understands where the change is happening in my industry. Okay, so after the third section, which is around requiring new ways of offering learning. And I've got some examples as well to share with you of how we've done some of these things. So the first thing is, I think, learning in the flow of work and generally is all about experiences. You know, we can attend conferences, we can attend training programs, but my bet is that the most memorable training program that you've ever been on is the one where you had some positive emotional experience, or you connected with a colleague, or you learned something in a very different way that was facilitated really well. And this is just a real world photograph example where we, pre-COVID, took our people into the cinema to show them certain videos around leadership strategy, because we believe that not everyone often has access to the senior leadership strategy. So again, just thinking creatively is something I beg all learning teams and HR teams to think about, of how you can take yourself outside the box and innovate in the way you provide your services so that employees reconnect with you and see you as being innovative in what you offer. Again, personalized and self-directed learning, as I mentioned earlier, is the key consumer shift for us from an employee point of view. And we found that we need to provide that, and we cannot do that without digital platforms. There are various digital platforms out there. I'm sure most of you have now gone on this. We have multiple. We have 4 or 5 leading digital platforms, depending on whether you're looking at banking skills, whether you're looking at deep technical or technology skills, or if you're just looking at leadership and personal and interpersonal skills. So we have provided to employees a wide variety of platforms. Now, these platforms have thousands of courses, and our role, we find, is to become curators rather than creators. We find that we need to provide learning in the context of the employee and where they are. So you'll see some examples here of newsletters that we send out based on very specific topics that then curate content across the value chain of the different platforms. So you get it all on the page. If you want to learn fintech, you go to that particular, mailer. If you want to learn problem solving, you go to that one. And if you want self-awareness. So this is how we're driving, very contextual learning in a specific agenda. Because while we may say that we provided, these learning platforms and you've got thousands of courses at your disposal, does not mean they're going to go and consume all of that. So the all-you-can-eat buffet is probably not the best approach as you evolve in your learning strategy. This is another example, again, of a women's program that we ran, again, with very bespoke learning pointers. You can see in the middle over here, through that particular platform, which I think was Harvard, we created some very important content on the topic of managing change, as you can see over here. And then also we provide extra resources like what books to read and what are some of the leading thinkers in that space of that topic. And we typically drip these newsletters on a monthly basis, so we accompany our learners in that journey of change. Another example as well is we start developing toolkits that become, the gateway to, again, our learning platform. So you can see in this example as well, This is a dedicated toolkit to personal skills. Personal skills are becoming such an important thing with a lot of people working online. I think the radar on personal skills has dropped quite a bit. You need to be equally engaging online as you need to be back in the real world, in the physical world. So you can see over here, this is just one of the pages as an example of how we've curated learning content across different categories. And the color coding of the blue and the black and the gray denote different learning platforms. Again, this is quite a nice blended learning model where if we have in-classroom programs, we make sure a lot of our pre-work points people back to the online platforms. Because what happens is if you're attending a program around leading change, you then want to know more about leading change at that point in time. It doesn't make sense that you're going to provide the information 6 months down the line because the context of that moment has gone away. So we provide a lot of blended learning solutions to make sure that people engage with the most relevant content when they're doing the deep learning around that. We've also built, as many of you have, not just digital library solutions, we've also built online portals internally. We use SharePoint. A lot of you have different platforms, but you can see here, all our employees can come on and they can see very clearly is what are our investment banking flagship offerings, what are dedicated offerings around management and leadership, and so on. So this is just some screenshots of our online platforms. In terms of creating buzz as well, we've been very good at creating engagement in the offices. We chose a color that's not our corporate color. You can see on the right-hand side, our emblem is blue. We went away from that and picked something completely different because we stand out. And you can see that we create such buzz on the floor when we launched one or two of our flagship digital learning offerings, as well as the learning experience platform, that we really create an environment where people were really curious about what is this about and what are they selling internally. So that's something nice to do as well, to create that buzz. And the last point on this particular thing around how we need to work differently is we need to be brave. And what do I mean by being brave? We need to measure everything that we do, because if we don't measure, we can't manage. We use technology even pre-COVID. We use actually QR codes on the mobile phone. So when the person attends a program, they can scan the QR code and they can quickly complete just 4 or 5 questions around the learning intervention. So we get real world data and we know where we stand in terms of our learning delivery and the quality. We then take that data. We take the data and pop it into a dashboard, as this is an example, and you can see the questions on the left-hand side. We just asked them whether it was a good investment of their time. Did they learn some new knowledge and skills to do their job better? Was it a good balance of content quality and presentation? And was the facilitator top-notch? So we believe that these are the 4 really important questions that we want to measure, and we track that on every program delivery, as you can see on our calendar above. So this gives us the data if we are really cutting edge or not. We then represent that into a lot of dashboards, which we report back to senior management. And you can see once you have the confidence that what you're doing is world-class, once you have the confidence that the feedback from employees is really positive, it drives a very different level of conversation because you start telling stories with the data analytics that you have to share with them. And then lastly, which also is a bit of creativity in the way we've looked at going back to employees and creating the excitement and buzz of learning, is to have a lot of evidence around photography and videography. So we create an enormous amount of content when we roll out programs. We like to close it off with like a 3 or 5 minute video that we often play back to our people. I actually have the video here to play for you, but I'm going to skip it in the interest of time. Now, my last segment is around how do we as learning leaders adapt and change? So I think what's really important, as many of you have experienced, ultimately the music stops playing and we have fewer chairs to sit on. There's a lot of shifts that are happening globally, downsizing, restructuring, and so on. This is going to be a reality. You will not possibly have a seat at this round table. You may have to go somewhere else. And you'll only be invited there if you have the relevant skills. So we as learning teams and HR teams need to make sure that we don't become obsolete, that employees don't look at us as a tick box function, but look at us as really creative solution providers in the internal landscape. So we believe that a new dawn has come for our profession, and we need to get there. but some fundamental mindsets need to shift around that. So when learners or employees want to solve something, why do we create? We shouldn't create from scratch. We should assemble. If they want to find something, we tend to manage. We don't empower our people. We don't provide the infrastructure of learning. That is the future. If you're providing a very strict calendar with very rigid rules, then you're failing in the learning function. I believe the role of us is to provide infrastructure for people to access things at their own consumption. That really is the mind and the landscape of the curious learner. I think what's really important as well is that we need to be future-proof. In all of this, I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that how times have changed, how consumers have changed, how our employees have changed, how we need to change in providing services, and we cannot do that until we change ourselves. So we need to future fit ourselves in order to be relevant in the future. There's often that old adage that says, it's often the cobbler's son that doesn't have the shoes, because we're so focused on serving our audience that we forget to take care of ourselves. So that's something really important. And I always ask my team, what did you learn today? What did you learn this week? And in the annual review, what did you learn this year? And that's not about training programs. It's about what fundamental shifts have you made in order to becoming a high-performing learning professional. We also find that there's no time for average. Whatever we do should be up to the mark. You saw some of the data analytics we do on our programs and our offerings and our digital libraries. We want to make sure that the time we invest in everything that we provide has to be best in class. If you're doing average, take it out. Why waste time in something that is not hitting the mark? Reallocate that time and resources into things that is most relevant to make sure you provide the best service in what you do. When I joined the organization, this was my team structure. It was very formal. It was very segmented. It was very siloed. One silo wouldn't talk to the other. There was no stretch assignments. There was no special projects. There was no domain expertise. There was no center of expertise. And I really shaped things up over the last couple of years. And now we're a crazy bunch. This is my team. I'm proud to say that. And we work not in the traditional hierarchical way in that diagram. We worked in a very network style. You've got people here that report directly to me. You've got people that are 3 levels down, but yet work on a special project, stretch assignment, a domain area with its talent, learning technology, and so on. And everyone gets exposure to everything. And guess what? We also rotate that every 18 months. So we really are living, I guess, the promise of what the future organization needs to be. And just to wrap up, to share with you, we've had some good success as well. In 2019, just before COVID, a lot of our efforts were recognized at a global stage at the European Foundation on Management Development. So I guess what I'm saying is these are not just lessons that I picked out of a random reading, 4 or 5 learning books. This really is a true story. This is the true story of my personal journey, the way I've looked and learned from other people in the multiple organizations I worked, and I believe what it takes to build a winning team. And I'd like to end finally with this slide where Einstein always said, I never teach my pupils, I only attempt to provide the conditions in which they can learn. And I truly believe that the HR learning function is about this. We don't have all the answers. We don't know the future. We can only help leaders along the journey and provide the right conditions, the tools, the resources, and the toolboxes in order for them to be successful. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed this presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Vish. That was fantastic. I like that you touched upon various topics of taking away centralized approach and decentralizing it, different stages of learners. I like the marathon example that you gave. Yeah, and also the micro skill. What can you make of it? I think those are very, very insightful sessions. We've got very little time. We're running out of time, but very quickly, Vish, if you could just touch upon one question. There are a lot of questions in the chat, but if you can just touch upon one very quickly, what might have to change in terms of a learning experience to achieve a reasonable level of skill transfer?
Okay, so I'm guessing the question is around what do we need to do from a learning point of view to make sure effective skills transfer.
Yes.
So I think that really happens predominantly in the on-the-job learning space. So if you think about the way, for example, in banking, we run client service teams, we want to make sure that, once you have a capability area or a competence area that you identify that's critical to the business, you can never have 1, 2, or 3 people holding the knowledge, because they can always leave and they can carry that institutional knowledge to competitors and other organizations. What's really important is to create that culture of mentoring and shadowing by having a multidisciplinary team report into that. So when we service, let's say, large corporate clients from corporate investment banking, we make sure we create a client service team so that no one particular client service lead has all the knowledge to that client. So in the client service team, you'll then have someone from global markets, someone from investment banking, someone from trade, someone from payments, and so on. And then you have a client service lead. But when you go to a client, they always go as a team. So what starts happening is that institutional or client knowledge that resides with one person becomes the knowledge that resides in a larger team. And that's the way, and if you think about an organization like Google and so on, they always work in teams. They never work alone. They make sure that people are always leveraging knowledge together. And it's not just about making sure that you upskill everyone and that skills transfer. You also got to acknowledge that not one person has all the answers.
Yes.
The diversity of the team, and if the leader has the diversity mindset, he make sure that he hears from everyone on the team and constantly builds the knowledge along the way on the particular capability area. So I hope that helps.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was a very, very insightful. Thanks, Vish, for your time. You came on board, joining HRM Summit at very short notice. Very obliged, very grateful. And you pulled off a great session. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Take care. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.